The 17th of March is known the world over as St. Patrick's Day. Allegedly that was the date that the man who brought Christianity to Ireland died. You may have heard some things about Patrick, how he drove the snakes from Ireland and tried to teach about the Trinity with a shamrock. Well, the reality is that such things are more myth and legend than the truth. Thankfully, however, there are two documents that have been preserved that more likely came from Patrick himself. The most well-known of those was his Confessions, and though not an autobiography, it can help us put together some bits and pieces about his life. As a young boy, he was taken from a fairly privileged home, it would seem, on the western edge of the Roman Empire by some raiders that had come across from Ireland. And it was during this time that Patrick appears to have become a Christian. He wrote in his confession, "It was there that the Lord opened the understanding of my unbelieving heart, so that I should recall my sin, I should turn with all my heart to the living God." Indeed, one of his most famous one-liners is, "I am Patrick, a sinner." And that's actually what God says about all of us. We're sinners. In the book of Romans, for example, Paul would write there, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God." I wonder, as you watch this, is that something that you're aware about yourself? A sinner. But what does it mean to be a sinner? Well, it means that we have really messed up. It means that we've broken God's laws. And if we're honest, we know that to be true. If you think of God's 10-point checklist, we call it the 10 Commandments. How far do you get in the list before you see that you just fall short and fail? Take the very first commandment. "You shall have no other gods before me," God said. What's your self-assessment then? Well, have you ever put your understanding before what God says? That's making yourself greater than God. That's fail for the very first commandment. Or what's the most important thing in the world to you? Is it your family? Is it your health? Well, whatever is the most important to us, that's our God. And so we have broken the very first foundational commandment. And that makes you and me sinners before God. In fact, it gets worse, because we break the commandments by what we do and don't do, by what we say and don't say. Even in how we think, we break God's laws. So with regards to God's 10-point test, we have failed stamped all over us. And that leaves us with a big problem. It means that we're guilty before God and deserving His holy wrath, and barred, kept out of heaven. In Romans 6 it says the wages of sin is death. In Ephesians 2 it says we are all by nature children of wrath. In Revelation 21 it says, speaking of heaven, nothing unclean will enter it. So what do you do when you know that something is wrong with you? Well, don't you go to someone who can fix the problem? And that's what Patrick did. He went to God with his problem of his sin. He went to God to find the answer, and God provides the answer in the cross of His Son, Jesus Christ. You see, man deserved to die for his sin, and God sent His Son into the world to take that punishment, to take that death. That's what happened. Jesus Christ, God's Son, became a man, yet still God, and died as a substitute in the place of many. And the only way that we can have our sins forgiven is to do what Patrick did, to own up to God, to tell Him we're sinners, and go to Him and say, "Lord, I have heard that because of Jesus, You pardon sins, forgive me." Patrick realized something was wrong. I am Patrick, a sinner. Wonder, do you have that realization? And Patrick didn't stop there realizing he was a sinner. He said, I did turn and with all my heart to God. In other words, he believed that Jesus Christ saved sinners and he trusted in him. He turned from his sin and he began a new life of following Jesus Christ. You'll not be able to do much by way of celebrating St. Patrick's Day this year, but perhaps you could give some time to thinking. It's interesting that it was in a time of great difficulty in Patrick's life that his eyes were opened to God. And perhaps in this past year of great difficulty, your eyes have begun to open too, and you're aware that if you were to die, you would not be ready to meet God because you're a sinner. And the good news is that sinners can be saved, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish but have everlasting life.